Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm proud to play a game of Dune Imperium. This is going to be the digital version of the game. What I'm going to do is play it on medium mode with 3 different computerized opponents. This version of the game recently came out and I'm playing it on Steam. And what's kind of fun about this is that you can play anytime. You can play against human opponents or you can play against AI opponents as well. What's kind of nice about it, if you just have 20 to 30 minutes to play a game of Dune Imperium, you can go ahead and play a game and sit down. You don't have to unpack the board, you don't have to set up the board. It's kind of nice. Currently I'm playing the green player, and really what my goal is initially when I play the basic version of Dune Imperium, I'm going to try to amass roughly 13 Solari, and there's 2 different reasons for that. The first and probably the most important is that I want to get my Sword Master as soon as possible in the game, and the Sword Master is going to be located in the top right of the board in the green section, and that's going to give me an additional agent to play. So that's something that's going to be on my mind at the very beginning of the game. Secondarily, I also want a seat on the High Council, which is going to be 5 Solari. So when I add those 2 together, really my target is going to be 13 Solari. So I'm looking for spaces on the board that either produce Solari, or I'm going to do some spice harvesting, and then I can transfer the spice into Solari later on in the game. Another thing I really enjoy about the digital version of the game is that it keeps a lot of the game mechanics flowing, and you don't really have to think about them. The only thing that you're going to have to invest time on is when you're playing on your turn, so you don't have to track any of the other strange mechanics that are going on in the game, because those are going to be controlled by a lot of the AI opponents. And so you don't have to be worrying about, oh, is this player playing correctly? Are they playing the rules correctly? So you don't really have to be a rules vulture, since it is sort of automated. A lot of those concerns just go right out the window, and so it makes it a lot more simplistic, and you can just focus on your strategy as opposed to focusing on the game mechanics and exactly what the other players are doing. Now that it's the start of my turn, you're going to notice that I just landed on a spot that's going to net me another 3 Solari. And what's great about this is that now I have 5 Solari, and if I wanted to, I could invest in a High Council seat. We're really not that far into the game, so being able to have 5 Solari and have the option to get the High Council seat actually on this turn can be a big advantage. If I'm looking to purchase better cards over the course of the game, having those 2 influence points from the High Council is really going to go a long way, and that's going to pay dividends every single turn that I have a reveal action. So that's kind of my focus when I'm playing just a basic version of Dune Imperium. Now what you're noticing is that I went ahead and did some spice harvesting, and now I have 3 spice in reserve. And what I'm going to try to do next turn is actually cash the spice in for Solari, and that's going to net me my 13 Solari that I'm going to need to get my extra agent and my seat on the High Council. Something else that you should be looking for early on in the game is that can you win conflicts with a minimal amount of troops? So as an example, if I win the conflict, I can choose 2 factions to gain influence with, and that's going to be pretty fantastic up front. I am basically only spending 3 of my soldiers to get this win, so getting 2 influence from a conflict early on in the game is really important. So currently what I'm doing right now is just simply buying additional cards for the rest of the game. But I have 8 attack value in the conflict right now, and so if I can win this and pull this off, this is going to be a big advantage for me early on in the game. So as you can see, the results from the conflict, I was able to win this, and I get 2 faction upgrades. Now, faction is going to net you a victory point, and you can do it for all 4 factions if you just have 2 influence in each of those factions over the course of the game. So that's kind of a natural way for you to get 4 victory points, and I highly recommend getting those 4 victory points, you know, pretty much every time you play the game. So for this round, I'm the first player, which is absolutely fantastic. So what I want to focus on is getting my 13 Solari, cashing it in, and then getting my Swordmaster. So what I need to do right now, probably the best move that I have, is to sell my 3 Spice, and then cash in and get the 8 Solari. Then what I want to do on my subsequent turn is I want to cash in some of that Solari, and then what I'm going to do is look to get the Swordmaster space on the board. This is going to give me an additional agent action every single round from this point forward in the game. And if you look at the other opponents that I'm playing against, they only have 2 agents. So unless they start stepping up, I'm going to be outproducing them when it comes to me being able to send agents to spaces and getting additional resources. So from this point onward, I've kind of taken the lead, and this is going to give me a huge advantage. So immediately after purchasing the Swordmaster space, I get an additional agent. That will give me 1 additional placement this round of the game. A lot of new players to Dune Imperium really worry about their victory point totals over building the infrastructure that they need to win the game. So as an example, you can see that the purple and the red player are both outpacing me when it comes to victory points. But what I'm worried about mostly is just simply building my engine and building the infrastructure I need to win. So I'm not going to be too concerned at this point that I'm not ahead on victory points because I have the extra agent, and then next turn I can hopefully get a seat on the High Council and then accelerate my card buying potential. So these are things that oftentimes new players kind of overlook. They just go for the raw point value, they go for the raw score. But what they're missing are the subtle strategies in which other players are then going to essentially outpace them. When you're playing a 4-player game of Dune Imperium, there's also something subtle about the conflicts. Oftentimes, if you just throw in 1 or 2 troops, you can get something back at the end of the round when the conflict resolves. And sometimes it can be, you know, like something as simple as like a spice or a water, but the investment is going to be very minimal. So for this round of the game, you're going to notice I threw 2 troops into the conflict. And this is going to allow me a shot at least getting a spice or a spice and a water resource for this conflict. And I didn't have to really invest a whole lot into that, just 2 troops. So during this reveal action, I'm also going to start looking to put cards into my deck for later on in the game. I haven't really purchased all that much right now, so I'm really purchasing some cheap cards. But now we're going to see the results of the conflict, so I was able to get a water and a spice off of that with a pretty minimal investment. Note that none of my other opponents have enough Solari this round to get the Swordmaster. Even if the Baron gets additional Solari this round, he doesn't actually have an agent to go to the Swordmaster space and get the additional agent that he needs to move forward with the game. So now I've just purchased a seat on the High Council, which is fantastic. I'm going to start being able to purchase better cards for cheaper. So now I have 2 points during my reveal phase to buy bigger cards. That's going to start giving me an advantage. So with the extra Swordmaster and a seat on the High Council, I have a pretty strong advantage over the game at this point. I'm still lagging behind on points just a little bit, but now that I have my seat on the High Council in conjunction with my extra agent, my point totals are going to start taking off. There's an option in this game that you could employ. At any point, you can reveal and purchase cards. So during this round, there was a hefty card worth, it cost 7 points to purchase. I think it's a fantastic card. So when I went ahead and skipped my last agent and went to reveal because I had the 7 points I needed to purchase that hefty card, there's also something a little bit subtle about the game as well. If there is a really impactful card that you can purchase, if you allow your opponent to do it, it's going to make them that much stronger. And so if you can jump on a card that is going to dramatically help you, it also prevents your opponent from getting it into their draw deck as well. So you're almost kind of hurting them at the same point that you're helping yourself and you're helping your draw deck. Now I've got that 7-cost card that's going to be cycling through my draw deck for the rest of the game, and it's going to be very impactful. Now that I have my infrastructure built, having a High Council seat and my extra agent, I'm going to focus on gaining points and gaining advantage. So what I'm going to be doing from this point forward is looking at the optimal spaces that I can go with each and every agent to maximize my resource gathering or my troop production. And what I'm going to do with that is it's going to be kind of subtle. I'm going to start being able to make a lot more troops than my enemies are, and I'm going to be harvesting resources better. So from this point forward, look at the best advantage you can get when you spend each agent, and it totally changes your way that you play the game. And once you have enough resources, then your options are improved significantly. So it increases the number of spaces and different locations you can go on the board, and it increases and improves your options. So always make sure you have a basic resource base, and that's going to be both water and spice to do some of the heavier actions over the course of the game. It just gives you a lot more flexibility. Since this conflict is one that gives me a victory point, I want to make sure that I'm investing troops appropriately so that I can win that victory point. So if we look at the conflict currently, my opponents really haven't put a lot of troops into the middle, and that's going to give me a more likely advantage over winning this conflict and getting that victory point. And what's hard for my opponents right now, they're kind of struggling because neither of them, or any of them, all three of them, still haven't purchased an additional agent. So they're not able to go to a lot of the spaces that they can put troops into the conflict. So this is giving me a lot more versatility, and now it's starting to pay off with victory points. because my opponent can't actually keep up with what I'm doing, because I can do an additional action every turn. So more than likely, unless somebody plays a really crazy intrigue card, I'm going to win this conflict, and it's going to net me a victory point. So at this point, I was able to win the conflict, and I get an additional victory point. So although I kind of started off kind of with my enemies outpacing me with victory points, now I'm on par with them. So I'm meeting their level of victory points, and from this point forward, I'm going to keep accelerating my process, and I'm going to keep gaining resources and victory points. I'm going to slowly start outpacing them further and further. So from this point forward, I'm going to make sure that I keep sort of my point advantage going, and then I'm actually starting to outpace them. My board presence for this turn is very, very high. I can go to almost any location on the board. When I went to the research station, it's going to net me a card draw of 3. And what that helps me do is build a pretty strong reveal phase. So even just drawing a card or two over the course of the game round can give you some really impactful reveal phases. Plus, I already have a seat on the High Council, which gives me 2 points. So you can have the ability to buy some really high-cost cards, or you could buy a Spice Must Flow card that will net you 1 victory point as well. So over the course of the game, even if you get just 1 or 2 of those Spice Must Flow cards, that's going to give you 2 victory points over the course of the game, and really your target is going to be 10. So if you think about that, getting 2 victory points off of those cards is a really strong advantage, and it's a good way to do that. So as an example of what I just did, I got myself another 1 point for purchasing power. So with the High Council, and then also that other space that I just purchased, that's going to give me 3. So really all I need is 6 at the end of the game round to do a reveal action, and then I can buy a Spice Must Flow card that will give me a victory point. So hopefully I can net that victory point during this round. It'll give me a good advantage on points. So for this round, I'm going to continue the process of drawing a bunch of extra cards. So I'm going to go to the Bene Gesserit space, which is going to give me 2 influence on the track, so that gave me 1 victory point. I can also then discard a card, basically, and that's going to allow me to start pruning my draw deck, and the cards that are cycling through, it's going to make it slightly stronger. So I got even more card drawing, and now I've made my deck a little bit stronger. So I'm on good pace for this game round to have a pretty fantastic reveal phase, and a very impactful one. And I have a pretty high probability of getting 1 of the Spice Must Flow cards on my reveal action. So as an example, I now have 11 influence that I can buy cards with, and that's going to be pretty amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and get that victory point. Something you should notice is that 2 of my computer opponents only have 3 victory points, and I'm sitting at 6. It's going to make it very difficult for those 2 players to win the game. They're going to have to outpace me significantly over the next few game rounds to even have a shot at winning. So as an example, I won this conflict as well. Now, the Baron, who is the purple player, really is my strongest opponent. That player has 3 agents and has 5 victory points, so I really have to worry about what the Baron is going to be doing over the course of the game. So that's going to be my number 1 threat, and so I want to be watching very carefully what that player does for the rest of the game, because that person still has the ability to overpower me and actually win, whereas the other 2, I think it's highly unlikely that they would beat me at this point in the game. Purchasing the Spacing Guild Highliner space on the board is absolutely amazing in the original version of the game. Not only does it net you 5 troops, which you could deploy immediately into the conflict, it also gives you 2 water, and that is absolutely amazing. Water is highly important in this game, and being able to get 2 water and 5 troops from one agent is just absolutely amazing. So the Spacing Guild Highliner space is one of those things that you want to go to and try to hit it at least 2 or 3 times over the course of the game if you can. It's going to make winning conflicts very, very easy as compared to the normal route of amassing troops. If you notice, the Baron is fairly aggressive at this part of the game, and there's a pretty good chance that the Baron can still win the game with the number of troops that he has placed into the conflict. You know, anything can happen, especially if he gets any entry cards. Currently, he doesn't have any, which is great. It's going to make him winning the conflict unlikely, but he still has additional agents that he can play to buff up his ability to really hurt me in the conflict. Gaining 2 influence from this conflict, in addition to getting an entry card, would be a really fantastic victory for me, and moving into the 8th round of the game, it would give me a really strong presence. So I'm hoping that everything works out with the combat on this turn, that will allow me then a pretty strong opening turn for the next round, and that will give me really strong advantage. Here is going to be yet another example of having so many points to spend. It was easy for me to get an additional victory point. And so this is the second Spice Must Flow I've purchased over the course of the game. And so think about it. I'd be kind of on pace with the Baron if it weren't for those 2 Spice Must Flow cards. They're pretty impactful, so I strongly recommend people look to them and purchase them over the course of the game. A lot of new players really kind of like shy away from both card drawing and then trying to get those Spice Must Flow cards. And I think kind of why they're turned off about them is that there's no like agent portion of the card, so they don't really get anything from it when they draw it into their hand. They can't use it for an agent action. So for this game round, I was able to win the conflict, and this is going to give me 2 influence in any one faction, which is pretty fantastic. It's going to allow me to get 2 troops, and I actually stole one of the trophies from my opponent. So my opponent lost a victory point, and I gained a victory point, which is pretty fantastic. So moving into round 8, I have a pretty strong presence. I only need 1 victory point to win the game and to trigger the endpoint condition. So once any player hits 10 points in the basic version of Dune Imperium, it literally will trigger the end of the game. So I'm kind of excited to get this game closed out. I have a pretty strong lead over my opponents, and hopefully if everything turns out well, I'll be able to close out the game on this round. Now the other thing too is if I don't manage to win this conflict, it's possible for one of my opponents to net 2 victory points, which is going to be a pretty sizable chunk of points, and it's going to allow somebody to catch up to me pretty quickly. So I want to make sure that I keep moving strong and I don't get complacent, and I make sure that I close out the game in a strong fashion. Now that I have a decent number of troops, I need to focus on trying to get them into the conflict as soon as possible. With 2 agents remaining, I'm not going to be able to get a ton of troops into the mix, but I might be able to put enough in that I can challenge my opponents over the course of this conflict. So hopefully I can do that. I'm lagging behind a little bit, but I could still pull it out. So at this point, the likelihood of me winning the conflict is about 0. The yellow player has invested heavily into this conflict, and it is basically impossible for me to catch up at this point. The thing that I want to do, and the thing that I want to keep on my mind, is that I don't want to waste any of my troops this turn. So I have 7 in my garrison. So I want to make sure that I'm not just throwing them away needlessly, because if I start the next round with 7 troops in my garrison, that's going to give me a huge advantage, and it's going to be very, very likely that I'm going to be able to win the conflict in the next round. So at this point, it's unlikely that I'll be able to close out the game on this turn. I was hoping that I could, but the computerized opponents are pretty strong and they're pretty wily, and they were able to shut down my plans. At this point in the game, purple is still a significant threat, and the red player is also beginning to catch up. Even if the yellow player wins this round, which they're likely to, and they get 2 victory points, which will bring them to 6, their garrison will be completely depleted, and that will put them at poor footing on the next round of combat. So although they just scored 2 victory points, it's still unlikely that they'll be able to catch up and actually win this game. So as we move into round 9, a double victory point conflict pops onto the table. So at this point, I have 7 troops in my garrison, and my enemies basically have nothing. Red just got 1 troop in their garrison, which puts me at a pretty big advantage for combat. So I want to try to get as many troops as I can out onto the table as quickly as possible, and that will significantly improve my ability to win the game. Because once I breach the 10-point mark, this will be the last round of the game, and thus it won't allow my opponents to really score any additional points. Now, one thing that they can do at the very back end of the game, but it's highly unlikely, there are some end game events that can give you victory points. So those are going to be intrigue cards. Now, there's not many of them in the original game set. So the original Dune Imperium, which is what we're playing. So it's going to be kind of unlikely that somebody could have a massive point catch up from something hidden in one of their intrigue cards. Last turn I played an agent to siege Tabor because I didn't have a water. So I really want to get Duncan, Idaho out onto the table, but I lacked the water to actually use him. Now, unfortunately, all the other purple spaces have been blocked, so I was unable to put him out. So now what I need to do is still focus on getting as many troops out as possible. The purple player has just dropped a pretty massive number of troops out. So now I'm going to spend my water instead on a Fremen board space. And that's going to allow me to deploy a large number of troops into the conflict. In addition to that, it's going to basically give me the water back that I just spent. because I increased my faction track with the Fremen. So at this point, I still have a pretty good shot at closing out the game on this round since I have so many troops in the conflict. Now, the purple player does have one intrigue card that is face down. I don't know what it is. If it's a combat card, that could cause an issue with the conflict, depending on how many troops end up out in the conflict by the end of this game round. So I still need to be kind of careful when I look at that. So I'm going to continue to push, and I'm going to continue to put more and more troops out into the conflict. Because, like I said, if I can close it out this turn, then that's perfect. I don't want them to beat me at the last moment. So really what I'm doing is going all out and hoping I can close it out on this game round. So at this point, pretty much everybody's agents are depleted, and we're going to start going through the reveal phase. And so we're going to get some minor adjustments to the combat totals that are out on the table. So now I'm sitting at 22, and the next player is going to be sitting at 10, which is purple. And so, it's possible if they have a bunch of stuff that they have hidden, but it's kind of unlikely that they're going to put so many combat markers onto the table that they're going to overpower me. Really, red and yellow don't have a shot at all in winning this conflict. So really what I'm looking at is probably a victory, and I'll be sitting at 11 points at the end of this game. The computer opponents are going all out. They're trying to amass as much combat value as possible. And in the end, they weren't able to do it. So I net 2 additional points, which triggers the end of the game. Now notice the Baron is playing one of those end game events. He had one hidden, and then also the red player as well. So the overall score is going to net me 11, then 9, 7, and 7. Overall, I really enjoy Dune Imperium Digital. I really like the ability to play Dune and only spend about 20 to 30 minutes. I also like that I can play against 3 computer opponents. They're actually pretty difficult to defeat. So overall, I think this is a pretty strong version of the game. If you really enjoy Dune Imperium and like the ability to play on your own, I would recommend checking this out. I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.